What if this war didn't begin in 2023, or 1948, or even 500 BC? What if what we're seeing now, between Iran and Israel, didn't just happen, but was written long before any of us were born? Ask yourself, why do some ancient texts mention Persia so often, but we never hear those parts in sermons? Why do certain prophecies sound eerily close to today's headlines, yet no one talks about them? Could it be that what we call current events are actually echoes of something much older? A cycle, a pattern, a script that was written down thousands of years ago, then silenced, hidden from plain sight? There's a name buried in the Bible that barely gets attention, a name that once meant power, prophecy, and empire: Persia. Today we call it Iran. Now ask yourself, why is Persia directly named in one of the Bible's most mysterious prophecies, alongside nations whose identities remain debated to this day? And why does that prophecy describe an attack on a peaceful land without walls? Sound familiar? But here's where it gets strange. The very chapter that outlines this event, Ezekiel 38, is rarely read in full. It's long, symbolic, and it uses language that most skip over without thought. But for those who pay attention, there are details, specific names, geographic clues, timelines that don't feel random anymore. And there's a deeper question underneath all of this. Why Persia? Why does that one name, out of all the ancient empires, continue to appear at the center of biblical prophecy and real-world conflict? Maybe it's coincidence. Or maybe the people who compiled the modern Bible left out more than they included. You see, not all prophecies made it into the final version. Some were erased, others were buried in scrolls, and a few were deemed too dangerous, too politically charged to ever be read aloud in a temple. Now imagine this. What if one of those hidden prophecies warned us about a future war between East and West? What if it spelled out a path of tension that would build over generations and finally ignite in our lifetime? And what if everything we're watching now, the airstrikes, the threats, the alliances forming, was actually part of something foretold? Not to scare us, but to warn us? We're going to explore this. We're going to trace the names. We're going to uncover why Persia, Israel, and a forgotten prophecy may hold answers to what's happening right now. But before we reveal what Ezekiel said, before we look at the clues scattered across ancient texts, there's one more question you should ask yourself. If prophecy is real, would we even recognize it when it arrives? To understand today's conflict between Iran and Israel, you have to go back, way back, not just decades, not even centuries, but thousands of years, to a time when these two nations were known by different names, and their destinies were already crossing in ways that would shape the future forever. Back then, Israel was a small kingdom, known as the land of the Hebrews, a people with a strange faith, one God, and a fierce sense of identity. And to the east rose a giant, a powerful empire called Persia. Persia wasn't just any kingdom, it was one of the most advanced, organized, and feared forces the ancient world had ever seen. Its kings ruled from cities like Persepolis and Susa, and its reach stretched across Asia into Africa and deep into the heart of the Middle East. The first recorded contact between the two wasn't war. It was actually mercy. Around 539 BCE, the Persian king Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon. Babylon had previously captured the Jewish people and exiled them from their homeland. But Cyrus did something unexpected, something no ruler of that time would usually consider. He let the Jews go home. He not only freed them from Babylonian captivity, but he also gave them permission to rebuild their temple in Jerusalem, a place that had been reduced to rubble. In the Bible, Cyrus is actually called God's anointed, a pagan king praised in the Hebrew scriptures because he acted as a divine tool for restoration. This moment created a unique relationship between the Jewish people and Persia. It wasn't hostile, it was respectful, even hopeful. But that was only the beginning, because over time, power shifted, empires changed, and alliances turned into rivalries. Persia, like every empire, expanded. It grew into a symbol of might, of ambition, and of control. The Jews, meanwhile, faced repeated conquests, scattering and suffering. Their identity remained, but their political power did not. In Persia, it continued to rise and fall through various dynasties until it became what we now call Iran. Here's where things get interesting. The name Persia may have changed, but the spiritual and political tension never truly disappeared. In fact, it evolved into something deeper. Throughout history, Persia-Iran has often positioned itself as a challenger to Western influence, and by extension, to Israel's modern role in global affairs. But it's not just politics. In both Iranian and Jewish religious traditions, there's a deep sense of destiny, a belief that these two peoples are not just nations, but symbols. Symbols of two worldviews, two paths, two ancient stories that were never meant to fully align. In Islamic theology, Iran views itself as a defender of faith against perceived corruption or injustice. In Jewish tradition, Israel sees itself as the promised land, a nation born from covenant and struggle. When these two forces collide, it's not just about land or borders. It's about identity, legacy, and some would say, divine prophecy. The echoes of the past are still alive. When modern Iran speaks against Israel, it's not new rhetoric. It's a continuation, a thread woven from the days of Cyrus, through centuries of empires to the geopolitics we see on the news today. This isn't just a new war brewing, it's an ancient rivalry reborn. And if the names have changed, the undercurrent remains the same. What was once Persia and Israel is now Iran and Israel. But the spiritual tension, the historical collision, and the prophetic energy behind it all, that hasn't changed at all. Now that we understand the ancient connection between Persia and Israel, let's move deeper into a prophecy, a vision written thousands of years ago, mysterious, ominous, and strangely more relevant now than ever before. It comes from the Book of Ezekiel, chapter 38. At first glance, it reads like ancient poetry, symbolic, dreamlike, full of strange names and places. But when you slow down, when you start matching those names to our modern map, the words begin to echo in a different way. Ezekiel describes a man named Gog from the land of Magog, a leader, a prince, a ruler of many nations. And then he says something that makes this prophecy impossible to ignore. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them. All of them with shields and helmets. Persia. That's not a metaphor. That's Iran, directly named as part of a future coalition preparing to go to war. But against who, the prophecy tells us? Against Israel. More specifically, it says Gog and his allies will attack a peaceful land, a land without walls. That phrase, a land without walls, might seem odd. In Ezekiel's time, every city had walls. But in modern times, Israel's cities are open, advanced, unwalled. They rely on technology and defense systems, not stone barriers. So already, we have a piece of ancient scripture describing a military invasion against an open land by a coalition that includes Persia. Let's pause there. If this isn't about our time, then why does it sound so familiar? Now let's look closer at the names Gog, Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, Beth Togarmah. These names don't match modern countries, but many scholars have tried to trace them. Most agree they refer to northern regions. Some say parts of Russia, Turkey, or Central Asia. Others believe Gog is not a single man, but a spiritual title, a symbol of future leadership or rebellion against divine order. But there's little doubt about Persia. Persia is Persia, Iran. So what does the prophecy actually say will happen? It describes this massive force led by Gog, with Persia at its side, moving against Israel in the last days. It says they'll come like a storm, covering the land, believing Israel is weak, vulnerable, divided, and they'll strike. But Ezekiel says something else too. He says this won't go unnoticed. He says the world, and even the divine, will respond. Now here's where interpretations begin to vary. Some believe this is describing a literal war or perhaps a future conflict we haven't seen yet. Others think it's symbolic, a picture of rising spiritual darkness. But either way, one thing is clear. Persia's role is not small. In this vision, Iran is not watching from the sidelines. It's part of the trigger, part of the coalition, part of the storm. And today, Iran is no small power. It funds militias. It forms alliances. It speaks openly against Israel's existence. And the tension, it keeps building, almost like we're moving towards something that's already been written. Some ask, why does the Bible get so specific here? Why name names? Why mention Persia at all? Unless it wasn't just a vision for Ezekiel's time, it was a warning, a pattern, a map for the future. Not every scholar agrees. Not every historian takes it literally. But the fact remains, the prophecy names Persia. It describes a coalition. It ends in conflict over Israel. And when we look at today's headlines, it's hard not to feel that ancient words are breathing again. The players are moving. And the script? It's already been written. If ancient names hold meaning today, then the next question is even more important. Could the Bible's old prophecies actually be speaking about our world right now? Because when Ezekiel spoke of Gog and Magog and listed allies like Persia, he wasn't reading a modern map. He was speaking from a time when empires had different names, borders were fluid, and geography was tied to kingdoms, not countries. But now, people have begun connecting the dots, and what they're finding is strange, even disturbing. Let's start with the obvious. Persia is mentioned directly in Ezekiel's prophecy. That's easy. Persia didn't vanish. It simply changed names. Today, we know it as Iran. But what about Gog and Magog? Scholars have long debated their identity. Some say Magog refers to the distant northern territories, which many connect to Russia or parts of Central Asia. Others believe Gog isn't a person, but a symbol, a title for a powerful leader or a spirit of rebellion that rises in the last days. Then there's Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah. Ancient names, mostly forgotten. But research into ancient maps places these regions in the area we now call Turkey, Armenia, and surrounding zones. Suddenly, it all starts to form a picture. A group of nations from the north, the east, and even the far south uniting in hostility toward Israel. And what about that strange phrase Ezekiel used? A land of unwalled villages. In his time, no city existed without walls. Walls were protection, survival, strength. So why would he say that? Why describe a land as vulnerable, open, exposed? In the modern world, especially in Israel, cities no longer rely on stone walls. They rely on technology, air defense, alliances, and even then, threats still surround them. When Ezekiel spoke of an unwalled land, he wasn't describing his time. He may have been describing ours. Now here's where it gets more intense. Many of the nations involved in Ezekiel's prophecy, whether named directly or symbolically, are today either in direct conflict with Israel or forming alliances with those who are. Iran, Russia, and Turkey, three key players in the Middle East and global politics, are all engaged in complex relationships involving Israel. Iran is openly hostile. Russia has military influence in Syria, near Israel's border. Turkey, once friendly with Israel, now stands in an uneasy position. Coincidence? Or are the old names scattered across dusty scrolls finally finding their modern reflections? Some say yes. Others say it's reading too much into coincidence. But here's the problem with dismissing it. These patterns keep lining up, not just the nations, but the order of events. First, tension, then alignment of certain countries, then an attack against a nation that doesn't seem ready for war, but stands firm anyway. All of it in a chapter written over 2,000 years ago. And it doesn't stop with Ezekiel. Throughout the Old Testament, and even in Revelation, we see similar patterns. Empires from the north, unrest in the east, a final stand in the Middle East. The details shift, the symbols vary, but the core idea stays the same. There will come a time when ancient rivals return, not by name, but by spirit, and the nations of the earth will move in ways that look political, but carry something deeper underneath. Not everyone accepts this. Some view it as allegory. Others say the prophecy already happened and long ago. But the unsettling part? It fits too well. If we're wrong, we're simply reading into ancient poetry. But if we're right, then these prophecies were never myths, they were warnings. And if modern nations are the ancient names reborn, then what comes next has already been written. If ancient texts seem to echo our present, then what about the texts we were never allowed to see? What if the most direct warnings, the clearest prophecies, were the ones we never heard in church? Not because they didn't exist, but because someone chose to leave them out. The Bible, as we know it today, wasn't always one single unified book. It was assembled, chosen, voted on. And in that process, many ancient writings were left behind. These books are now known as Apocrypha, or sometimes the forbidden texts, not because they were proven false, but because they were too strange, too bold, too unsettling. Take the Book of Enoch, for example. This ancient text speaks of a time when angels came down, taught humans forbidden knowledge, and triggered a war. Not just in heaven, but on earth. It describes giants, fallen beings, heavenly secrets that were never meant for human ears. Sound like myth? Maybe. But the early Jewish communities didn't think so. Even early Christians read Enoch. In fact, parts of it are even quoted in the New Testament. So why was it removed? Why was a book that talks about angelic rebellion, corrupted bloodlines, and judgments from the sky left out of the Bible? Just as war and prophecy were being redefined? Maybe because it painted too clear a picture. Maybe because it didn't leave room for polite interpretation. Now let's talk about 2 Esdras, another forgotten book. This one reads like a code. It speaks of a great shaking of nations, of wars that feel endless, and of a final gathering of kingdoms in the last days. One passage says, "The time shall come when the signs appear, and the nations shall be stirred, and the voice of confusion shall ring out." That doesn't sound like ancient in history. That sounds like a headline. So again, the question must be asked, why were these words erased? Why were books like 2 Esdras, Jubilees, Enoch, and others pushed out? Was it about control? Or were they simply too specific? Even the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the 1940s, revealed fragments of these forgotten books, some even older than the books that made it into the official Bible. These scrolls spoke of angelic councils, of heavenly wars, and of a time when divine beings would influence human kings. Sound familiar? It should, because that's the very language used in Ezekiel, in Daniel, in Revelation. Except here, the picture is even clearer. A war between light and darkness, unfolding not just in spirit, but through real nations, real leaders, real consequences. And the most haunting question of all, were these chapters removed? Because they described exactly what we were never meant to understand. Because they didn't just warn about spiritual danger. They named names, outlined events, predicted moments we are living right now. The deeper you go, the more it feels intentional. Like a veil was pulled over the truth, not to protect us, but to keep us from seeing what was always coming. The war between Iran and Israel, the shifting alliances of global powers, the rise of confusion, division, and unrest. All of it, somehow, mirrored in the texts they told us to ignore. So now we're left with fragments, clues, books buried beneath sand, sealed in caves, or dismissed as myth by scholars who never read them fully. But those who do read them see something different. They see warnings, they see patterns, they see a story that never stopped being told, only hidden. Because maybe the end was never meant to surprise us. Maybe it was all laid out. We just weren't given all the pages. So we've looked at the ancient names. We've traced Persia to Iran. We've followed the threads from Ezekiel's vision to modern headlines. We've seen forgotten books, missing warnings, and prophecies that feel like they're waking up again. Now, we arrive here, today, where missiles fly, where leaders exchange threats, where alliances tighten, where Iran and Israel sit on the edge of something that feels too familiar to be new. But is this just politics? Or is it something more? That's the question no one dares to ask on the evening news. Because if the answer is prophecy, then we're not just watching events unfold. We're watching a script, one written long ago, being played out, scene by scene. Think about it. Ezekiel 38 said a coalition would rise, a coalition from the north and the east, with Persia, Iran, at the center. It said they would come against a land without walls, a land living in peace, a land that didn't expect war. Now look at today. Iran arms proxies, Israel braces for retaliation, global superpowers pick sides, Russia, the US, Turkey, each with ancient echoes behind them, each playing a role, knowingly or not, in something older than politics. Some say it's just history repeating itself, but others feel it's something more. A cycle, yes, but not random. A pattern, written in the past, unfolding in the present. What's happening between Iran and Israel today didn't start yesterday, and it won't end with the next ceasefire, because underneath the surface, beneath the politics and diplomacy and media spin, is something heavier, something ancient, something spiritual. Call it prophecy, call it fate, call it the echo of a war that never really ended. Whatever name you choose, the signs are getting louder. When leaders speak, their words sound eerily close to those spoken in ancient scrolls. When battles break out, the geography matches what was foretold. And when chaos spreads, so does something else. A sense that we've been warned before. And maybe we were, maybe these are not new events. Maybe this isn't just the world spiraling on its own. Maybe it's all part of something foretold. A storm described in visions. A fire that's been smoldering beneath history for generations, waiting to rise. And now, here we are, living through the pages others once called myth. The players are in place. The tensions are real. The scrolls are open. So we must ask again, are we simply watching the news, or are we watching prophecy finally begin? And now we come to the final question. After everything we've uncovered, the ancient names, the erased chapters, the prophecy of war, the hidden alliances, and the texts they told us not to read, we're left with one haunting realization. Maybe this was never just a story. Maybe the Bible wasn't just recording the past. Maybe it was predicting the future. And maybe that future is now. Because whether you're religious or not, whether you believe in prophecy or in coincidence, you can't ignore the pattern. Persia, Israel, a coalition rising from the north, tensions at their peak, ancient writings aligning with modern reality. This isn't just symbolic. It's not vague. It's precise, and it's playing out in front of our eyes. And the most chilling part? It's not over. Ezekiel never said the war ends quickly. He never promised peace before the storm. He simply described a time when everything would come to a head, when nations would move like pieces on a board. But the game was already decided long before. So where does that leave us? Looking at a world on edge, with ancient scrolls that feel strangely present. A book written in deserts and temples now reading like tomorrow's newsfeed. Some may still call it coincidence, but others are starting to wonder, what else have we ignored? What other warnings still echo in forgotten verses, buried scrolls, or forbidden chapters? Because if the Bible predicted this, if it saw this moment coming, then what does it say happens next? That's the part no one talks about. Not on the news, not in speeches, and definitely not in classrooms. But here, in this quiet space, we can ask it. What else might be unfolding that we were never told to expect? If you've made it this far, it means you're not afraid to question, to go deeper, to ask what others avoid. And if you want to keep exploring hidden truths, lost prophecies, and ancient warnings that just might explain the world we live in, like this video, subscribe, and stay close. Because this story, it's not over yet. It's only just beginning.